the August 24th edition. I'm here today alone because Greg Narain is on vacation until the end of the month. And although while we have a couple of guests lined up to join us in his absence, this week was just a little bit too hectic and I did not have time to prep them properly. So this week it's just me. This is also the second time through. If you happen to catch it earlier, I recorded the whole show without any sound because there was no one here to tell me that I wasn't recording any sound. So good news. Before I get to the meat of the show, though, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what you would do if you wanted to come on the show with us. It's pretty easy. We broadcast live on Fridays at noon Eastern for about 10 or 20 minutes, depending on how much we have to talk about. Sometimes if I screw up, we do it twice. I'll send you a link to connect in by 11:50 a.m. for an AV check. Sometimes you'll be joining Greg and me. Other times it's just me. What do we talk about? Well, we talk about any topic related to marketing, rather large, digital and social media, advertising, influencer marketing, technology, AI, but also internet culture, consumer behavior, digital fraud, privacy, art, anything that really kind of wraps up into that marketing topic. If you'd like a topic, if you have a topic you'd like to bring to us, we would love to have you join us within that brief and build a conversation around it with you. So email me at sgetgood@getgood.com or message me on Facebook, and we will see if we can get you on the show. Remember, it's noon on Fridays, Eastern Time, and it really only takes about half an hour out of your day. Now to this week's topic, consumer attitudes and trust. And I do actually have two guests joining me this week. I've got Captain America, Mr. Steve Rogers, or Captain Steve Rogers. And of course, I have Mr. Rogers himself, Fred Rogers. These are sort of two icons of honest integrity, and I thought it'd be fun to have, my little Funko Pops here. And I only have two topics that I wanted to talk about this week because both are basically truth and lie. And the first is that consumers don't like or engage with sponsored content the same way they do so-called organic content. And I want to discuss this again this week because I read a great op-ed in Ad Age called In Defense of the Lowly Hashtags, Ad and Sponsored, by a woman named Natalie Zvat. I hope I pronounced her name right. In response to the statement that nobody likes the hashtag ad at an industry panel that was full of marketers, she shared her pride in using hashtag ad because it meant she was able to successfully monetize her content while creating valuable content for readers. This strikes a chord with me because I think treating sponsored content like a second-class citizen is lazy thinking. Because in fact, transparency and best practices would dictate that we disclose relationships that might impact an endorsement, even if the FTC guidelines did not. Fact, the FTC guidelines in the United States and similar guidelines in other countries do in fact dictate that we disclose when content is sponsored, when we create new content, whether it's a free product or we were paid. And then finally, in fact, people aren't really as black and white as all that there's sort of a rubric that organic is good and sponsored is bad or not good. We actually can get to nuance. I have seen a lot more of organic content that is, quite frankly, awful. And I've seen some amazing sponsored content that engages the audience as much as or better than organic content. So it's not like that we don't like advertising, it's that we don't like bad advertising. So whether it's an ad or a sponsored Instagram image or a sponsored post, it's incumbent upon us as content creators to create good content. And when it's sponsored, we disclose because it is the right thing to do. And, Cap agrees. And on social media, there's no situation where you don't have to disclose that content is sponsored, not even for celebrities. The reason for this is on social, we have none of the cues that inform us that an endorsement is an advertisement that we have in other media. When we see a celebrity on Ellen, we know she's pitching her new movie because that's how the talk show rubric works. When we see that another celebrity wearing logo gear, whether it's tennis or golf, we assume that he or she is sponsored by the brand because that's how sponsorship works at that level. So we have these outside cues that clue us into the fact that this is actually not an authentic, organic, not paid for, not compensated endorsement. But when we see that same celebrity promote something on Twitter or Instagram, her post looks just like any other post on Twitter or Instagram, just like all her other posts, just like any post that you or I might make. There's no cues to clue us in that this content is sponsored, that this post is sponsored. So When an advertisement doesn't look like an advertisement, it must be disclosed. Just this week, a friend forwarded me yet another article from the UK about celebrities that were not properly disclosing their sponsored content. And this is one time where wishing just won't make it so. Wishing you didn't have to disclose or inventing all sorts of reasons why it doesn't apply to you won't change the facts in advertising, or in Washington, D.C., because it's all about trust, right? Mr. Rogers? Oh, where's Mr. Rogers? There he is. So while it's true that people do treat sponsored content differently, the difference, in my opinion, is largely in the minds of the creators. If we stop assuming that people view sponsored content differently, and we focus on creating amazing quality content and honor the trust of our readers by being honest about our business relationships, we can and indeed fact should be proud of #ad. This week's other part truth, part myth is also related to trust. In this case, our trust in the social platforms and websites. Access Media Trends reported some Census Bureau data earlier this week that indicated that Americans are far less worried about online privacy than they used to be. Now, the report surmised that it's because we've become accustomed to trading it for access to services, to the platforms, to the things that we want to get. And I think that's true, that perhaps we are less worried about it when it comes to using the internet and using online services. We're willing to give up a little bit of privacy in order to get those free things. But I think we're still very concerned about data privacy, security, and integrity. And there are three different things, right? Data privacy is the privacy of your personal data, being sure that it's not shared inappropriately or where you haven't given permission for it to be used. Security is that people who have access to your private data actually keep it secure and don't let it get hacked into, so that the credit card companies, once they know your financial details, don't actually broadcast them to the world because they were hacked. And integrity is the integrity of data, to be ensured that the data we are accessing, that we're seeing, is actually true and real and not made up or not fake news. And we are still very concerned about all of those things, even though we do use all of the tools and the commerce sites on the internet that we do. Witness the Twitter storm about those fake billboards, and if you haven't seen them, there'll be a picture of them in the post that goes along with this. They hit London last week, and there were two of them, and they were basically taking over the bottom half of a Facebook ad. And so one of them was, "Fake news is not our friend." And instead of whatever Facebook had put there, these folks wrote, "It's just a great revenue source." And the other one was, "Data misuse is not our friend." And then the replacement was, "It's our business model." And they struck a chord online. There was a lot of chat back and forth on Twitter. It was covered in the media a little bit, because there is an underlying cognitive dissonance here between what the value we perceive we get from Facebook, and we feel like we do. I mean, this is broadcast live on Facebook, so I feel like there's value in Facebook, but the value that we're increasingly aware that Facebook is getting from us. And Gen Z is already replacing it in many cases using other tools. And it's not just because their parents are using Facebook so they don't want to. And including on college campuses, there was another little piece in that same Access Media Trends newsletter that talked about new competitors to the Facebook coming up on college campuses to replace Facebook, because privacy, security, integrity, what are they doing with my data? How are they using it? Am I going to see fake news from Russia? And I have been following this digital privacy conversation for more than 20 years, sometimes closely, sometimes less so. And I'm convinced that we're finally at an inflection point where it matters as much to consumers as it does to advocates and geeks like me. And it's an increasingly informed consumer who understands that there really are those three issues: privacy, security, and integrity. Being willing to give up a little bit of personal data in order to have access to a website or using a credit card to purchase something online is a fair trade for the convenience or the access, but we're no less concerned about the protection of that data, and that data is secured and it is not available to any fisher on the planet. So the truth is that we may be less worried about privacy in general, but because we become more informed, we're still likely very much worried about how that information might be used, whether that is true, whether bad actors can breach the walls. We're just more willing to accept the risk. So that's our show for today. I want to thank my guests, Captain Steve Rogers, and my other guest, Mr. Fred Rogers, for joining me today to talk about trust. And thank you for watching, and thank you very much for your attention. If you've watched this twice, once without sound, once with, thanks again. And that's our show for today. We'll be back next week with a couple of guests, one or two guests, not sure how many yet. And then following that, Greg will be back in September. And last little bit, links to the posts, articles that I mentioned will be in the blog post for this episode, which will get posted on my blog sometime over the weekend. That's it. Whenever you watch this, either have a great weekend, have a great week. Thank you so much for joining me. And that's Two Truths and a Lie this week times 2.